If God is in control, why didn't he stop this? That's the question you may have never had the courage to say out loud, but you've thought it countless times. You prayed, you trusted, you did everything right, and still the pain came. Something collapsed, a door closed, a loss happened, and now you find yourself divided between continuing to believe or beginning to doubt. In this video, we're going to face that question in a mature and honest way, without shallow answers, without ready-made phrases. You will understand the difference between God being in control and God intervening immediately. You'll discover why some things are allowed, what this reveals about faith, free will, and spiritual maturity, and how to see purpose where today there seems to be only confusion. If you've ever asked, why didn't God do something? Did he even hear me? Is this punishment? Then this video is for you. Stay until the end, because the way you understand this question can completely transform how you see your pain and how you trust God in the middle of it. There is a kind of pain that doesn't come only from what happened, but from the guilt of asking about it. You feel something inside you wanting to question, yet at the same time, you fear you may be crossing an invisible spiritual line. As if asking this question were a sign of weakness, disrespect, or even betrayal of your own faith. That inner tension can be just as exhausting as the suffering itself, because beyond dealing with the loss, you are also fighting against yourself. Many Christians learn early on that faith means never doubting, that spiritual maturity means remaining unshaken, without fluctuation, without questions. But that is not maturity. It is fear disguised as reverence. The Bible does not present a fragile God who is offended by sincere questions or who needs to be protected from our pain. The invisible problem here is not the question. It is repression. When you try to silence what you feel in order to appear more spiritual, you don't strengthen your faith. You simply push your doubts into a deeper, quieter place. And whatever is not brought before God inevitably begins to be processed away from him. This repression creates inner distance. You continue praying, but with controlled words. You continue reading scripture, but you avoid passages that seem to confront your current experience. Gradually, faith becomes more formal than relational. Not because God moved away, but because you began hiding what you truly feel. Psalm 62:8 says, "Pour out your hearts before him." Pouring out is not arranging beautiful words. It is not constructing a theologically correct speech. Pouring out means opening what is disorganized, confused, even contradictory. It means bringing your heart as it is, not as it should be. This completely changes the perspective. God does not ask you to filter your pain before approaching him. He does not require you to resolve your questions before speaking to him. He invites you to bring exactly what is creating the tension, including the question you are afraid to form. David did this repeatedly. Jeremiah did this. Habakkuk did this. They were not discarded for questioning. They were matured through dialogue. Their faith was not strengthened by the absence of questions, but by sustained honesty in God's presence. There is an important difference between questioning and accusing. Questioning seeks understanding within relationship. Accusing closes the heart and assumes it already knows the answer. When you ask why, you are often not challenging God's authority, but trying to reconcile your experience with what you believe about him. That reconciliation is part of growth. Childlike faith expects everything to make sense immediately. Mature faith can endure the tension between what it knows about God and what it still does not understand about life. And that tension is not a sign of spiritual failure. It is a sign of depth in formation. Perhaps your greatest struggle is not what happened, but the fear of admitting that it shook your confidence. You feel you should be stronger, that you should be reacting better, that other Christians seem to handle this with more composure, but God does not work with idealized versions of you. He works with your concrete reality. Pain does not scandalize God. Confusion does not surprise him. Your question does not threaten him. He is not insecure in the face of your fragility, nor disappointed because you are not responding perfectly. This means you can approach him without spiritual performance, without pretending to have stability you do not yet possess. When you understand this, something begins to shift internally. The question stops being an act of rebellion and becomes a starting point for deeper growth. Instead of pushing you away from God, it can draw you closer, if it is taken to the right place, with a heart open and willing to listen. Before trying to answer why God did not stop something, you must settle this first. You have permission to ask. And that permission does not weaken your faith. It prepares the ground for it to become more stable, more conscious, and less superficial. Honesty is not the end of faith. Often, it is the beginning of maturity. There are moments when pain feels incompatible with God's love. You know He loves you. You have heard it countless times, and perhaps you have even experienced it in other seasons of your life. But when something serious happens and He does not intervene, the mind begins to form a silent conclusion. If He truly loved me, He would have stopped it. That association between love and immediate intervention is almost automatic and rarely questioned. Without realizing it, we learn that care means constant protection from any loss. We transfer that logic to God. If He is in control and if He loves, then nothing should move outside what we consider acceptable. When something breaks that pattern, we sense divine inconsistency. John 11 directly confronts that expectation. The text clearly states that Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. Love is not implied, it is declared. Yet when He heard that Lazarus was sick, Jesus stayed where He was for 2 more days. Love affirmed, intervention delayed. That combination unsettles our logic. If we analyze it rationally, Jesus had full power to prevent that death. He had already healed at a distance before. He could have left immediately. He could have altered the course of events with a single word. The fact that He did not reveals not limitation, but choice. That choice is what makes us uncomfortable, because it dismantles the idea that true love always manifests itself by preventing suffering. Yet in that situation, pain preceded a greater revelation. The delay did not cancel love. It became part of a process that would expand everyone's spiritual understanding. It is important to notice that Jesus did not treat the pain with theological coldness. He did not begin with explanation. He did not start with rationalization. He wept. He drew near. He listened to the frustration expressed in the words, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." That sentence echoes exactly what many feel today. Notice that Jesus did not rebuke that statement. He did not say, "How dare you doubt?" He did not invalidate the emotion. This reveals something profound. A question born from pain does not push Jesus away. It creates space for a deeper revelation of who He is. The invisible pattern we need to identify is this. We tend to measure God's love by the speed of the solution. The faster He acts, the safer we feel. But John 11 shows that divine care is not necessarily connected to urgency. It is connected to purpose. This does not mean that every pain will result in a visible or spectacular miracle. The focus of the text is not the miracle itself, but the revelation of who Jesus is. If He had resolved everything immediately, the understanding of His identity and power would have been smaller. Applied to your reality, there may be situations you wished had been stopped at the beginning, and they were not. The tendency is to interpret that permission as neglect, but the account of Lazarus invites us to consider another possibility. There may be intention where you see only delay. That space between the request and the intervention reveals something inside us. It exposes what we truly believe about God. Trusting when everything is solved quickly is simple. Trusting when there is a season of silence and waiting is a different level of maturity. There is also a relational dimension that cannot be ignored. Jesus did not avoid the scene of loss. He went to the tomb. He entered the environment of grief. He did not prevent the pain, but he also did not withdraw from it. This corrects another common assumption. If God did not stop it, then he must not be present. Perhaps the question that needs to mature within you is not only why didn't he do it, but what is he revealing through this? In the case of Lazarus, there was a manifestation of glory that would not have occurred without the preceding process. The suffering was real, but it was not the final chapter. This understanding does not automatically remove the pain you feel today, but it begins to reorganize how you interpret events. Love is not synonymous with immediate intervention. Sometimes love works in depth, preparing something that will only be understood later. If this more mature approach has been helping you reorganize your faith, consider subscribing to the channel. Our goal here is to strengthen your spiritual understanding so that your trust does not depend only on favorable circumstances. When something slips out of your control, the immediate feeling is disorder. You try to mentally organize what happened, look for explanations, search for someone to blame, but nothing seems sufficient. And almost without noticing, you project that same sense of instability onto God. If you couldn't prevent it and God didn't prevent it either, then maybe no one is really governing the situation. That is how doubt begins to seep in. The problem is that we often define control according to purely human logic. For us, control means preventing any undesirable outcome. If something went wrong, we assume there was failure. If there was pain, we conclude someone lost authority. That definition feels natural, but it is not necessarily biblical. We tend to associate control with the prevention of discomfort. If a door closed, if a relationship ended, if a loss occurred, our minds automatically interpret it as the absence of effective protection. But that interpretation is built on an expectation that may need to be re-examined. Isaiah 55:8-9 declares, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways." This passage is not merely about mystery, it is about a structural difference in perspective. God does not govern the way we would govern. His vision is not limited to the present moment. He sees consequences, connections, and outcomes that go beyond our emotional and intellectual reach. What appears to us as a definitive loss may, within the larger narrative, be redirection. Human control is immediate micromanagement. We want to interfere in every variable, adjust every detail, eliminate every risk. Divine control is sovereignty over the final purpose. God may allow stages we do not fully understand without losing authority over the greater outcome. This means something can be allowed without being outside God's government. He can permit a difficult chapter without surrendering control of the entire story. Divine sovereignty is not weakened by painful events. It remains active even when invisible. When we confuse intervention with control, we create emotionally unstable expectations. If God does not act the way we imagine, we conclude he has failed. But the absence of immediate intervention does not mean the absence of ongoing sovereignty. There is also a time dimension involved. We think in terms of urgency. God works in terms of eternity. What we believe must be resolved now may be part of a larger process that requires time, development, and maturation. If God resolved everything instantly, our trust would rest only on quick solutions. But when there is space between the request and the answer, we are forced to deal with God's character, not just with outcomes. And that deepens faith. Sovereignty is not the same as constant interference. If God prevented absolutely everything that could generate pain, he would also prevent real choices, real consequences, and real growth. A world completely shielded from discomfort would also be a world without responsibility and without character formation. There is another essential distinction. Allowing is not the same as approving. God may allow something he does not celebrate. He may permit a consequence without taking pleasure in it. Permission is not indifference. It is a strategic decision within a greater government. This understanding begins to reorganize your interpretation of events. Instead of asking, "Who lost control?" you begin to ask, "What is still being guided by God, even if I cannot see it?" That shift in focus brings inner stability. Spiritual maturity involves accepting that not every chapter will be comfortable, but the author remains the same. He does not abandon the narrative when conflict appears. He does not surrender authority because a scene became painful. When you separate control from immediate intervention, your faith stops depending exclusively on quick results. It begins to rest on the consistent character of God. That produces a trust that is less impulsive and more grounded. If this broader perspective is helping you see your situation more clearly, consider subscribing to the channel. Here, we seek to develop a faith that grows in discernment and stability, not just in momentary emotion. There is a profound difference between something being painful and something being pointless. When you are going through a trial, everything feels heavy, confusing, and unnecessary. It feels like ongoing exhaustion, as if you are being pressed beyond what you can handle. And then the inevitable question arises. If God could have stopped this, why would he allow me to go through this process? James 1:2-4 states, "My brothers and sisters, consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance, and let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing." This passage does not romanticize suffering, nor does it ask you to pretend that pain does not hurt. It reveals that something is being produced within the trial. Notice the logic of the passage. Trial produces testing. Testing produces perseverance. Perseverance produces maturity. There is a sequence of development. Pain is not presented as the final goal, but as the environment where something is being shaped. That changes the way we interpret what we are going through. If God removed every situation that requires perseverance, he would also remove the possibility of deep growth. A faith that is never tested remains superficial. It may be sincere, but it is not solid. It believes while everything is stable, but it does not know how to stand when the ground begins to shake. It is important to clarify something essential. Not every pain is directly sent by God as a teaching tool. We live in a world marked by human choices, limitations, and real consequences. Yet even when he is not the cause of the pain, he can be the redeemer of the process. This distinction is necessary to avoid two extremes: blaming God for everything or believing he is not involved at all. Spiritual maturity recognizes that God can use even circumstances that were not ideally designed by him to produce growth. There is also a difference between destructive pain and transformative pain. Destructive pain is what we go through unconsciously, accumulating only frustration and hardness. Transformative pain, though difficult, produces humility, empathy, discernment, and inner depth. What defines that difference is not only the event, but the posture with which it is faced. When you understand that formation may be taking place, your mind begins to look for learning even while you still long for relief. That does not make the process easy, but it makes it meaningful. Spiritual maturity involves accepting that God prioritizes character over comfort. That truth is uncomfortable because we all prefer immediate stability. We want peace now, answers now, solutions now. But God works in layers that go beyond the surface of circumstances. If you look back at your own journey, you may realize that your greatest seasons of growth were not the calmest ones. They were the ones that required difficult decisions, a revision of expectations, and inner strengthening. Processes that, while happening, felt unfair or unnecessary. This does not diminish the intensity of your current pain. It does not turn suffering into something light or simple, but it offers a new lens. Perhaps something is being developed within you that could not emerge in a completely comfortable environment. A trial reveals what still needs to be strengthened. It exposes weaknesses, but it also builds resilience. It reveals dependence, but it also forms a more conscious trust. And that kind of maturity does not grow in environments protected from all tension. When you begin to see the process as formation, the question gradually changes. Instead of remaining only in, "Why is this happening to me?" a new question emerges. What is being built in me through this? That shift does not remove the discomfort, but it introduces direction. One of the greatest fears that emerges in suffering is not just the pain itself, but the feeling of abandonment. When something difficult happens and is not prevented, the mind quickly builds a narrative. If God is in control and allowed this, maybe he decided to step away. That conclusion does not come from theology. It comes from emotion. And when emotion speaks loudly, it feels convincing. Psalm 23:4 declares, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Notice something essential. The text does not promise the absence of valleys. It acknowledges the journey through them. The valley is part of the path for those who trust God. The promise is not exemption, but constant presence. This confronts a silent expectation many people carry, that God's presence should prevent any difficult scenario. But the psalmist does not say, "I will not pass through the valley." He says, "I will not fear, for you are with me." Security is not found in the elimination of pain, but in companionship within it. There is a profound difference between suffering and abandonment. Suffering is a real experience. Abandonment is an interpretation we construct. Pain may be concrete, but the conclusion that God has left your story needs to be examined more carefully. Not every pain indicates divine distance. Often, the absence of explanation is confused with the absence of presence. When there is no clear answer, when there is no immediate intervention, the heart assumes there is no care. But presence does not always appear in the form of detailed explanations. Sometimes it appears in quiet sustenance. There are moments when God does not remove the situation but strengthens you within it. He does not cancel the valley, but walks beside you as you pass through it. This requires a different kind of faith, less dependent on ideal circumstances and more anchored in the consistent character of God. When you revisit your own story, you may recognize seasons when you did not see immediate help. Yet looking back, you realize you did not collapse the way you could have. There was strength you did not know you had. There was stability that did not seem natural. This is a dimension of God's presence that is not always perceived in the moment, but becomes visible over time. Spiritual maturity begins when you learn to separate what you feel from what is revealed as truth. Feeling alone is not the same as being alone. This does not mean denying your emotions or pretending stability. It means submitting your interpretation to the truth of Scripture. The valley is real. The shadow is real. The fear may be real. But God's companionship is also real. And that companionship redefines the journey. When God allows something you do not understand, it does not mean He has withdrawn. It may mean He is leading you through something that does not yet make full sense. His presence does not depend on your complete understanding of the situation. There is also silent growth that takes place when you learn to walk consciously aware of that presence. Trust stops being rooted only in problem resolution and begins to rest in relational consistency. This understanding changes how you move through suffering. Instead of walking with a sense of rejection, you begin to walk with awareness of accompaniment. And that awareness produces courage, stability, and emotional resilience. There is another part of this conversation that many avoid because it requires balance, human responsibility. When something painful happens, our first reaction is to ask where God was. But not every pain comes from direct divine intervention. Many arise from real choices made by real people, including ourselves. Galatians 6:7 states, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. A man reaps what he sows." This principle is not a threat, it is structure. It reveals that God created a world where decisions produce consequences, and that is part of the dignity of human freedom. If God automatically cancelled every consequence, he would also cancel freedom. True love requires real choice, and real choice includes the possibility of error, failure, and impact. A world where no decision carries effect would be a world without responsibility. This means some pains are not the direct result of God's will, but of the interaction between freedom and consequence. Sometimes they are personal decisions. Sometimes they are the decisions of others that affect us. In both cases, God's sovereignty is not cancelled, but he does not turn every human choice into something artificially harmless. It is important to avoid two extremes here. The first is blaming God for everything. The second is blaming the victim for everything. Not every pain is the direct consequence of a specific personal mistake, but the principle of sowing and reaping still stands. Actions have real outcomes. Permission is not approval. God may allow a consequence to unfold without celebrating it. He respects the moral structure he himself established. Constantly interrupting all consequences would create an incoherent universe. This understanding can be uncomfortable because it reminds us that not everything is spiritual mystery. Some situations are the result of decisions accumulated over time. Others arise from a world where collective free will produces unpredictable effects. Spiritual maturity involves recognizing this reality without losing faith. It means understanding that God's sovereignty does not eliminate human responsibility. He remains God, but we remain moral agents with real freedom. It also invites personal reflection. Instead of asking only, "Why didn't God stop this?" it may be necessary to ask, what choices were involved in this process? That question is not meant to generate automatic guilt, but clarity. At the same time, even when pain comes from human decisions, yours or others, God can still redeem it. He does not erase consequences automatically, but he can transform the impact into learning, course correction, and growth. This understanding broadens your perspective. Not everything God allows is something he originally desired, but everything he allows can be woven into a greater purpose, without denying the reality of human responsibility. If this clarity is helping you see your own story with greater discernment, consider subscribing to the channel. Here, we seek to strengthen your faith through balanced understanding and spiritual maturity. When pain drags on, an unsettling feeling begins to grow. It seems like nothing is happening. You pray, reflect, try to hold on to your faith, yet externally everything remains the same. And in that space, a silent question emerges. While I am suffering, what is God doing? Is he simply watching? Romans 8:28 declares, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Notice that the verse does not say all things are good. It says they work together for good. There is ongoing action even when it is not visible. To work together implies movement. It implies process. It implies that something is being organized beyond what you can see. God does not make pain disappear as if it never existed, but he can transform pain into an instrument of formation and realignment. Suffering is not ignored. It is integrated into a greater purpose. Often we expect God to be working only in external circumstances. We want a change of scenery, immediate results, concrete resolution. But frequently the deepest work is happening internally. While you suffer, God may be strengthening your discernment. He may be refining your priorities. He may be adjusting your expectations. He may be expanding your empathy. These changes are quiet, but structural. They alter the way you will live the next chapter. There is also an aspect of invisible protection. We do not always realize what we were spared from. We do not always know which paths were closed to prevent even greater consequences. Divine sovereignty operates not only in what we see, but also in what we never experience. Suffering can also expose hidden dependencies. It can reveal where your security was overly anchored in people, plans, or outcomes. And that exposure, though uncomfortable, prepares a faith that is less circumstantial and more centered on God. To work together does not mean to rush. It means to guide. God is not hurried, but He is not absent. He works at levels that are not immediately perceptible. What appears to be stagnation may actually be invisible reorganization. Sometimes what you interpret as silence is, in reality, maturation. The time that feels unproductive may be consolidating something within you that will sustain future decisions with greater balance. It is important to avoid a simplistic reading of Romans 8:28. The verse does not promise that everything will end exactly as you desire. It promises that nothing will be beyond the reach of redemption. Even what was unjust, unexpected, or painful can be redirected toward a greater good. This shifts your inner posture. Instead of living only waiting for the pain to disappear, you begin to ask, what is being formed in me while this is happening? That question does not deny the pain, but it activates growth within it. If this deeper perspective is helping you see your story with more hope and discernment, consider subscribing to the channel. Our goal is to strengthen your faith through solid understanding and spiritual maturity. There is a profound difference between seeking explanation and seeking direction. When something painful happens, the automatic question is, why? Why did this happen to me? Why now? Why didn't God stop it? That question is natural, but it has limits. It tries to reconstruct the past, but rarely builds the future. The why looks for cause. It wants logic, justification, rational alignment, and in some cases answers may come with time. But there are situations where a full explanation will simply never arrive. Remaining trapped only in that question can generate ongoing exhaustion. In 2 Corinthians 4:16-18, Paul writes, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." Here we see a shift in focus. It is not the denial of pain, it is the repositioning of vision. The apostle does not ignore suffering. He acknowledges pressure, fragility, and weariness. But he redirects his gaze to something greater than the immediate event. This is the transition from why to for what. It is not abandoning the search for understanding. It is expanding it. When you ask only why, your mind stays anchored in the past. When you begin to ask for what, you activate purpose. The question shifts from explanation to direction. It does not eliminate pain, but it places it within a path. This shift requires spiritual maturity, because why can feed resentment when no clear answer appears. But for what opens space for growth, adjustment, and alignment. It asks, what can this experience produce in me? How can it reposition me? This does not mean that everything that happened was desired by God. It means that even what was not ideal can be redirected. What seems like loss can become realignment. What seems like an ending can become transition. There is also an eternal dimension involved. Paul contrasts what is temporary with what is eternal. When you look only at the present moment, everything feels definitive. But when you widen your vision, you realize this chapter is not the entire story. The question, for what, brings responsibility and awareness. It invites you to participate in the process rather than merely react to it. Instead of remaining only a victim of circumstances, you become someone who grows through them. This mental repositioning does not happen overnight. It requires a continuous decision of focus. It requires remembering that God governs the final outcome, even when the current path feels uneven. When you learn to ask the right question, your trust stops depending on complete explanations. It begins to depend on the relationship with the one who leads the story. And that produces stability. Job went through losses that made no sense. He lost his possessions, lost his children, lost his health. And for a long time, he did not receive detailed explanations about what was happening behind the spiritual scenes. He asked questions, he expressed pain, he confronted his own limitations, and yet the book does not end with a technical lesson explaining every reason. In Job 42:5, he declares, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." Notice what changed. Job does not say, "Now I understand everything." He says, "Now I know you differently." The transformation was not merely circumstantial, it was relational. That is decisive. God does not always answer every why question. He does not always reveal every detail of the plan, but he can reveal himself more deeply. And when the relationship grows stronger, the need for complete explanations begins to diminish. Throughout this video, you have seen that God is not offended by your question. You have seen that Jesus loved and still allowed. You understood that control is not the same as immediate intervention. You recognize that processes form maturity, that presence is not cancelled by the valley, and that human responsibility is part of the structure of life. Now everything converges into this truth. God's control is greater than your understanding. He did not lose authority over your story because one chapter was painful. He did not stop being sovereign because something was not prevented. This does not mean your pain is small. It does not mean you should ignore it. It means it is not the final authority over your narrative. God remains the author. Perhaps you still do not have all the answers. Perhaps some questions remain open. But if you allow it, this crisis can become a point of maturation. Not because it was easy, but because it was faced with honesty and discernment. Childlike faith demands complete explanations. Mature faith learns to trust God's character even when understanding is partial. That is the difference between a faith based on personal control and a faith based on relationship. If this video has brought clarity to you, consider subscribing to the channel. Here, we seek to develop a stable faith grounded in understanding and spiritual maturity, so that your trust in God does not depend only on favorable circumstances. And before we close, carry this question with you. Instead of asking only why God did not stop it, are you willing to trust that He is still guiding your story?